Oh, hi folks, I'm Mike and welcome to my channel. Today's video will be the first in a series of instructional videos on Pinewood Derby racing. This video will be about the bodies. I'll start with the block of wood that comes in the kit you pick up at the Boy Scout store. I'll go over the laser bodies I use. And last, I'll show you a stick body that a lot of the guys in the leagues are using now. So stay tuned, you might enjoy this. So guys, you know I went to the Boy Scout store just simply to pick up these two kits. Now while I was there, I did also pick up maybe 20 sets of wheels, and I picked up some tools. I've had people ask me recently if I've ever used the tools that they sell at the Boy Scout store. And you know I never have. So I thought maybe in a future video I could test this stuff out to see if it's any good. But anyhow, let's get back to the bodies. I mentioned earlier I would be sharing with you three different options when it comes to the wood of a Pinewood Derby car. The first would be the wood directly from the kit. I'll show you exactly how I'd cut this block if my rules stated I have to use the wood from the kit. But before we get into that, I'd like to point out a few differences between these two blocks. As you can see, the block on the right's got a much more noticeable grain pattern. The one on the left, you can't even see the grain. So the block on the right, I know this from experience, and I'll weigh these tonight when I get home, but the block on the right is going to weigh more. As a result, I'm going to use the one on the left. If you guys have the opportunity to open a couple boxes when you're picking out your kit, do it. Pick a lighter block out. Once we've determined which block to use, I guess it's time to rip it down to a 1/4 inch and lay it out. In this video, I won't be using the slots. I'm going to flip this thing over and rip it down. I'll provide a drawing that will work whether you use the slots or not. Okay, so our first order of business is to cut out these openings that I've marked with an X. However you want to do it is fine. I know some people use a Dremel, others will make a series of drill holes and then come back with a razor blade. But I'm not going to lie, I own a laser. So in an effort to save some time, I went ahead and cut this body out on my laser. By the way, I sell these bodies on my websites if you're interested. So this is our starting point. The rear two openings are going to be used as weight pockets, so we don't have to do anything with those yet. The front two will need filled. Now I use balsa to fill these openings. When I first started, I used ribs and created what they called a ladder car. Most everybody racing in the leagues did the same thing. I was convinced I needed the lightest body that I could build. My opinion has changed considerably in the last few years. I finally figured out that my cars were twisting slightly as soon as the gate dropped. When I started filling these openings completely with balsa rather than using the ribs, I had one car that picked up literally 4,000th of a second. Which might not sound like much, but I promise you, if you ever want to race league, that is significant. Now I make sure all my bodies weigh at least 9 to 10 grams. Okay, so now that it's time to assemble, the first thing I'd do is I'd add a 1/4 inch piece of wood directly to the nose, and then I would remove 1/4 of an inch from the rear of the body. Now we all know that we've got to move the weight back to create energy. By doing this, I'm able to move the wheels back a 1/4 inch. And in addition to that, we all know that a car is going to continue to create energy as it's dropping. By moving those wheels back that 1/4 inch, it keeps it on the hill just a 1/4 inch longer. Now I have yet to see any rules that won't allow this, but that doesn't mean they're not out there. So carefully check your rules. So we are quickly getting this body completed. Now that we've added a 1/4 inch to the front of the car, we've subtracted a 1/4 inch from the back of the car, and we have secured our balsa in the front two cavities, it's time to add a piece of 1/64 inch plywood over our weight pockets. Now this will provide a surface to attach the weights to later. I know others prefer a wood glue. I've never had any issues with CA glue. As long as I remember to remove the excess glue from the weight cavities with the Q-tip before it hardens, I've never had any issues. The last two things I'll do to this car are sand the bottom, and I do that to make sure I have a completely flat surface on the bottom before I go to drill. And then I'll shape the nose. Now, you know, I'm going to bring the nose to a point. I'll shape that with a belt sander. So folks, I'm going to call this body done. It's ready to be drilled. Let's see what it weighs. 11.56 grams, and that's just about perfect. Okay guys, so I'm gonna put this one aside and we are gonna move on to the laser cut bodies I race in the leagues. Okay guys, so here are a couple bodies that I'm sure I'm going to end up racing in the league races. And as you can see, the basic construction is the same as what I've already shown you. So after cutting the body, I filled the front two cavities with balsa, and I've covered the weight pockets with a 1/64 inch plywood. The two differences are the wheelbase and the species of wood that I prefer. This is poplar. It's actually my favorite, but I also like basswood. But before I get into that, I'd like to go over the wheelbase. If you are like me, I'm sure you've watched every video on YouTube that has anything to do with Pinewood Derby. Most people suggest that you move the front wheel all the way to the front of the car and the rear wheel all the way to the back of the car. Now there's no question that's going to make a car more stable, but you're sacrificing potential speed. Now don't get me wrong, I want my car to be stable. I just don't want to sacrifice potential speed. There are other factors that you have to take into account that can affect how stable your car is. Like how much weight do you have behind the rear axle? I like running 14 cubes. That gives me about somewhere between 65 and 70 grams of weight behind the axle. But that also makes the car less stable. My happy medium seems to be 4.5 to 5 inches of wheelbase. Okay guys, so now let's talk about the species of lumber. The two species of wood I like better than the pine that comes in the kit are poplar and basswood. This happens to be poplar. It's my favorite. For the longest time, I steered away from poplar because it's a heavier species of wood. Remember, I mentioned earlier that when I first started racing these little cars, I felt the need to get my body as light as possible. So I didn't give poplar a fair chance. Now I like it the best because I feel as though it drills the best. I'll end up with my best drill. Okay folks, so I guess it's time to move on to our third and final option, the stick body. I'm going to show you how to get this body out of these pieces of wood. The material that you'll need are two pieces of plywood, 1/64 of an inch thick, that measure 1 3/4 by 7. In the past I was able to pick this up at Menards. My local Menards no longer stocks it. I ordered this on Amazon. You're also going to need 4 ribs that are 1/4 by 1/4 by 1.5 inch basswood. Last, you're going to need 2 pieces of basswood that are 1/4 by 1/8 by 7 inches long. Now I've actually made these a little longer. I'll cut them down to size later. Now that the assembly is going to begin, I'm going to include a drawing on how I've laid this car out. Most of the cars I race have a 4 3/4 inch wheelbase, so that's what I'll be doing here. Now I'll start by adding one side, then the ribs, and then the other side. So let me get that much done, and I'll see you again in just a minute. So now that it's assembled, there's just a couple things that we have to do before we can add the top piece of plywood. I'll cut the ends off and I'll shape the nose. Also, I'll be removing the plywood at the weight pockets to give me access. Finally, we get to install the top. I'll add a little CA glue, then I'll apply the top and apply some pressure for 30 seconds. So folks, I'm gonna call this body done. So folks, thank you very much for watching my video. If you've made it this far, I would have to assume you're as addicted to this little hobby as I am. So please, if you're interested, like, share, and subscribe. I'm gonna pick a name at random and send that person some laser cut bodies. And we'll see you on the next one.